Councillor Julie Brickles passed away. Councillor Brickles had been a councillor since 2011. She was also an ex-member of the Planning Committee and served with distinction. And I think it would be appropriate, this is the first formal meeting within Fylde Council that has been held, I believe, since her passing away. So I think it would be appropriate if we stood and we had 1 minute silence, which would be timed. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for helping us to mark with respect the passing away of Councillor Julie Brickles. First of all, could I officially welcome everybody here, members, officers, and members of the public. I have to remind everybody, this is part of my duty, but I'm not going to read it completely out. I think we've done this so many times before. We have a microphone etiquette and usage guidance note here, which you have as a laminated copy, and it reminds all attendees to basically use the microphones when speaking, to turn on the microphone when speaking, ensuring that you speak into the microphone itself or in the direction of the microphone. And once you've finished speaking, please turn it off. And mentions about correct usage of the system. So if we can accommodate that, that would be wonderful. Thank you very much. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? No? We'll move on. Confirmation of minutes. And this was for the meeting held on the 3rd of July. Are we all in favour of correct record of the minutes? Please raise your hands or otherwise indicate. Thank you. You don't need to do it. It's okay. Yes, we've got observers here today, so he's been very dutiful in putting his hand up, but you don't need to do that. You can just observe. Okay. Substitute members, please.
We have Councillor Frank Andrews here on behalf of Councillor Sackle and Councillor Bill Taylor on here on behalf of Jordan Ledger. And I've also received apologies from Councillor Kelly Farrington.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you for those substitutes for attending today. Before we move on to planning matters, and we'll be starting with item 3, because we have 2 speakers on that particular item. You will be aware that there were some late observations for this item and another item, so I'm going to give members 2 or 3 minutes if they haven't had chance. I think we've had some physical copies made as well. Yeah, okay. Members, are we ready to look at this application? Thank you. We're looking at item 3, which is on page 69 of the report, which is Southview Farm, Greenhorse Lane, Greenhorse with Thistleton. The protocol of the meeting for members of the public who may not be aware of how this is conducted is fairly straightforward, that the application is briefly presented by an officer. On this occasion, there are 2 speakers. After the brief presentation by an officer of this item, we will break for 2 speakers. We come up to the rostrum up here, and you have 3 minutes in which to be able to say what you think about the application. After that, we will then go back to the officer, who will then complete the full presentation with all the detail, and then we will have questions and the debate amongst members, and then the application will be assessed. And I think that's all that I have to say at this point. So I'm going to introduce Andrew, the officer, and he will go through the initial presentation.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, everyone. My name's Andrew Stell. I'm the Development Manager here at Files, and I'll be presenting this on another one of the applications today. So starting off with this application, viewing the slide on the screen, just to get a general location of the site. This is the M55 motorway, junction 3, Fleetwood Road, coming north up to Windy Harbour, and the site's generally indicated by the red circle there. On Greenhorse Lane, which comes through, this Greenhorse Lane comes through, predominantly a rural road, serves a number of dwellings and farms, former farms, leisure facilities, caravan sites and the like, fishing lakes. So that's where we are. The site is part of a former farm. The agricultural activity on that farm has ceased. And you saw the rural nature of the site. It is all designated as countryside in the local plan. This application is to establish some dog exercise fields, or a dog exercise facility, which is on two fields to the rear of the farm buildings, to the north of the farm buildings. The parish council have not raised any observations on the application. And although they have made some comments about a meeting which the agent has responded to since the publication of the agenda, so that's referenced in the latest observations schedule that you've just read. The application's here at committee because of the scale of the site. It's a major development in planning terms because of the physical site area of the fields, and that means it needs to come to committee because of that factor. And in this case, the officer recommendation is to grant planning permission subject to a number of conditions, one of which has been revised, or is suggested it is revised through the late observations paper to clarify the scope of a management plan that's to be operated as part of the facility. So just to give a little bit more information about it before I break for the speakers. This is obviously on the left, a zoomed up image. So the farm itself is these buildings here. Fleetwood Road, Greenhorse Lane, sorry, runs along the bottom of the slide. You've got these farm buildings, and then the fields that are proposed to be used are those to the rear of the buildings that you see on the right-hand image within the red line of the application site. So fairly straightforward development in terms of there isn't really any built development taking place, other than the subdivision of the fields into different sections, and the provision of fencing around the perimeter of the site to ensure that the dogs are contained in that area. Just some brief highlights of elements of the scheme there. It's 2 fields used by dog walking owners and professional dog walkers. That would be booked, so they would go through an online booking facility to book your slot at the site. Uses the existing access to the farm from Greenhorse Lane. There wasn't actually an initial proposal when the application was first submitted to use one of the buildings within the site, one of the farm buildings. That's no longer part of the scheme, so that's been removed. There's parking available on the concrete apron. So there's the fencing there. And there's an idea, there's a planning condition that restricts the use to 8 AM to 8 PM. That's actually been one of the areas that's been tightened through the late observations because it operates during daylight hours. So there are more restricted hours during the winter months when obviously there's less daylight than there is today. Like I say, it's booked online. So that's the application in front of us in brief. I'll now break for speakers.
Hand over to the Vice Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I think as the Chairman pointed out briefly, each speaker will have 3 minutes to put their points across. I will time that and I'll give you a warning a few seconds before the end. And then if you're still speaking at the 3 minutes, I'll ask you to conclude in one final sentence. So without further ado, if I could call Lucia House, who is speaking in objection to the application.
That's on. Right. Good morning, everybody, through the chair. My name is Mrs. Lucia House, and I'm a resident of Greenhalgh Lane and a parish councillor for Greenhalgh and Thistleton. Following consultations as a resident and parish councillor with other residents of the hamlet, my objections to this dog field proposal are as follows. First, the majority of residents on Greenhalgh Lane are not at all happy at the possibility of the increase of additional noise from dogs and traffic throughout the days and late into the evenings. Second, with the anticipated increased density of traffic associated with this proposal, on top of industrial heavy goods vehicles, farm vehicles, domestic deliveries, storage vans, towed caravans, all passing amongst dog walkers, horse riders, cyclists and walkers on a very narrow country lane without any pavements, a situation which barely allows 2 cars abreast. This is an accident waiting to happen. Over the 40 years I have lived in Greenhalgh Lane, I have experienced a massive increase of through traffic from the main A585 road through to Wheaton and Blackpool. This increase has been generated from the surrounding developments which have been permitted by the Planning Committee. Examples: the industrial lorry park at Stanley Villa Farm and the Norbreck storage facility on Greenhalgh Lane itself. 3 ongoing stables already established on the lane, fishing lakes, caravan parks, all local to this lane. It would seem the council is trying to make an industrial estate of the region at the expense of council tax paying residents. Other residents and families would have liked to have registered their objections in person, but due to working overseas, operating in hospitals, child watch, or on ongoing domestic issues, few people have been able to attend, but I believe they have put their objections in writing. If this proposal is to go through, it should be a consideration for people living in the immediate vicinity to reduce the actual operating hours so as not to extend dog operations beyond 1800 hours in the evening, to give locals some respite for what is being seen as a daily irritation. Preferably reducing the business time to 5 days, not 7 days per week. Thank you for listening to our concerns.
Thank you for that, Mrs. House.
Thank you very much.
Next, it's okay to leave it.
Please.
If next I could call Stuart Wells, who is the agent for the applicant, please. Good morning, Stuart.
Thank you.
In your own time, 3 minutes, I'll give you a call 15 seconds before the end, and not necessarily cover you one, I'm sure it won't be.
Brilliant. And that's
Over to you, sir. It's all right.
excellent. Yes, thank you, Chair, Vice Chair, members. My name is Stuart Wells, the agent for Mr. Goodyear. Quite simply, this is an application to allow dog owners to walk and train their dogs in a safe and controlled environment. The proposals include a larger dog walking field and a smaller training paddock. This is not an intense use, with no new hard standing or buildings proposed. Both fields will provide a high quality recreational space, helping to alleviate pressures on other open spaces and footpaths in light of dramatically increased dog ownership. Similar fields have recently been approved in the countryside across Lancashire. Typically, there'll be only 1 to 2 people with 1 to 2 dogs per session on each field, and on occasion a professional dog walker may use the site to walk up to 6 dogs, but there's nothing more to the proposal than this. The opening hours control the level of use to a maximum of 8 AM to 8 PM in the summer, with reduced hours in the winter. Similar opening hours again have been approved for dog fields across the country. There are well-established boundaries and buffer areas creating physical and visual separation between the dog fields and neighbouring properties, ensuring there would be no impact on residential amenity. There would be no noticeable difference in noise levels when compared to the former working farm, and any noise and activity would also be no different to a person walking their dogs past one's own house or using a public park or a dog in a neighbour's back garden. The only difference here is that the council actually has the ability to control that level of use. The Environmental Protection Officer has considered all of this and raises no objection. This is a recreational space wholly appropriate in the countryside, with the proposed fencing being common in rural areas with a soft and discreet appearance. The choice of fencing is deliberate to ensure that there is no possibility of dogs escaping, which is an expectation of customers using the fields. The Highway Authority also has no objection and are happy with the number of parking spaces being proposed, including the overflow spaces, and have confirmed that the impact on local roads is acceptable and that the access is safe. A significant amount of new native planting is proposed, including a new woodland, nectar-rich wildflowers, longer grassland, new hedgerows and a wildlife margin around the perimeter of the site to enable the continued passage of larger mammals and other wildlife. Together, these measures represent significant environmental enhancements. This proposal will support a land-based rural business and represents an appropriate form of agricultural diversification, supporting the local rural economy. When considering those matters relevant to planning, as your planning officers have found, the proposal fully accords with policies of the Fard Local Plan and the NPPF, and as such, we respectfully ask this application to be approved. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Vice Chair. That concludes the speakers, so we go back to the officer who will resume his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So just to continue with the scheme here, these are some images taken obviously from Google Street View. This is the access point to the site on Greenhouse Lane. So this is the access point here. These are the farm buildings that are not part of the scheme, but obviously were used for the agricultural activity there. So the access point comes in here. The track comes around the rear of those buildings to get to the fields that are located around the back. Second image on the right, just looking the other way, so you can see that the access point is a well-established one and is onto a straight part of that road where there's good visibility available in both directions. Just slightly different views, excuse me, slightly different views, so you can see coming in here, this is more of the site. This view is across the front of those buildings to indicate the track that users would use to come around the back of the site, where you get to this point here, which shows the rear of the buildings and shows the area where the dog exercise would take place. So there's nothing really more to it than that. It's the use of existing fields, it's the use of existing hard standing for vehicular parking. There's fencing that's erected around the fields to to provide security for the animals and make sure that the exercise can be done without the dogs escaping. But beyond that's all we have. So looking at the sort of main considerations that raises, the starting point is obviously the local plan policy. The site is in the countryside. Policy GD4 applies. That's restrictive of development types, but does support uses that are appropriate for a rural area. Here we've got no new built development, so there's no considerations of that nature, and we have a use of a site that's using the existing grass field that the farm would have used for its agricultural activity, just for a different purpose. Obviously, it gives space for dogs to exercise, and so it satisfies the requirements of GD4, which one of the exceptions to the restraint allows for uses that are appropriate in a rural area in which the exercise of dogs clearly is. In landscape terms, there's no visual impact. There's no, like I said, there's no development. There's some branch style fencing and some post and rail sort of sheep netting style fencing being erected, but again, that's very typical of rural farms. There will be some sort of paraphernalia within the fields in terms of jumps, I suppose, or sort of play structures for the dogs to use, but that's not going to be of any substance, so that's not really having any great impact on the landscape. And there is elements of landscaping enhancement proposed as part of the scheme in terms of putting planting around the edge, as the agent said about bringing planting schemes in there and hedging and enhancing the hedging around the edge of the site. Highway matters. The site has an existing access. It obviously had previous agricultural use. That agricultural traffic has gone away as a result of the conclusion of the agricultural activity at the site. So whilst this will be bringing some additional vehicles to the location, those are more less than would have been there from the agricultural activity. You saw the access point is a good and wide access point. You saw the visibility displays are good in both directions. There is on-site parking available, and there are conditions to require that that's available and signed, so it's clear to visitors to the site that they would be able to where they would be able to park associated with this activity, which was one of the points that the county highways requested. Excuse me. In terms of amenity considerations, there obviously is a potential for noise to be generated from the activity around the site and from dogs barking. In terms of controlling that, there's three real ways that that's done. You've got the opening hours of the facility, which is set out in the planning condition is a maximum of 8 in the morning till 8 at night. In terms of the late observations, that's pared back to relate to the daytime hours. So in the winter months of January and December, that would be concluded at 4 p.m. before extending to 5 p.m. in February, 7 p.m. in March, and then on to 8 p.m. when the clocks have gone back forward in spring. When the clocks have changed the hours, that time is extended to 8 p.m. when obviously this time of year you've got the daylight activity. So it's getting away from things like having illumination on site, which can be quite untypical in rural areas like that. That also obviously controls the potential for disturbance to neighbouring properties from when dogs are on site. The second control is through the numbers of dogs. So there's only one user in each field at once. They would have there's a online booking arrangement. They would access the site using a keypad. So when you book, you get the key code, because the code's changed regularly to ensure that that you know, people can't just use it without booking. And then there's a control that you would only be allowed to bring up to 6 dogs at once if you were a professional dog walker. So you've got those controls over the number of dogs. Obviously, you've only got one person on the site at once, so the dogs are familiar with each other. It's not as if you've got dogs that are strangers and therefore potentially likely to bark as a reaction to that. So all these points are brought in to try and control the level of activity and ensure that the noise that's generated doesn't have a harmful impact on neighbouring amenity. The final thing, excuse me, the final thing on that is the physical separation of the site from neighbouring properties, where, if you recall the aerial image, it's sat to the rear of the farm buildings. So it's there is that separation distance as well to assist with amenity. So pulling all that together, the officer recommendation is to grant planning permission. That is subject to a revision to a couple of the conditions on the agenda papers. One relates to the hours that I've just described, and another relates to bringing in control over the management plan that's submitted, so that there's all the elements that I've described about the keypad, the number of dogs and all that is covered as part of that condition. So it's a much more precise condition than was published in the agenda papers, and that's where we are with that one, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Open to members now for questions. We've got Councillor Griffiths.
Councillor Evans was first.
Oh, sorry.
Councillor Evans was first.
Councillor Evans was first.
Councillor Griffiths.
You deferring? All right. Councillor Griffiths, then Councillor Evans, then Councillor Goodman.
Thank you, Chair. I use a similar facility online, etc. I was just wondering, is there going to be CCTV? Because there is the one I use. Has that been mentioned?
There's no reference to it in the plan in the management plan or any details that I've seen. Obviously, if I go back to the image of the site, the site access is somewhere that it will be very straightforward for CCTV to be erected around there to provide that level of security.
Yeah, the CCTV is actually on the field.
Right, okay.
So there's only you on the field.
Right.
And people on other fields.
Right.
But I just wondered, because then if anything happened, if somebody said it was really noisy, etc., you could have your evidence, couldn't you?
Yeah.
Of what went on.
Well, yeah. There isn't any reference to CCTV in the information in front of us.
No.
That I've seen.
Could that be considered, do you think?
I mean, it is possible for a condition to be drafted to require that details of a CCTV system are submitted in terms of the location of cameras.
Yeah.
That is a I suppose it's not an untypical arrangement given what you've described.
Yeah.
And it would be something that would fall within the remit of a planning condition.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to bring Councillor Dixon, who's just asked to intervene now. Okay.
Yeah, just to say that if it was about noise issues like that, CCTV would be no good. It would need to come through a noise app which the council would give to someone to record it on. If it was coming from a CCTV camera, it wouldn't be evidence that could be used anyway.
Thank you, Councillor Dixon. Councillor Evans.
Good morning, Chair. Thank you for that presentation. I've got a certain amount of sympathy with the parish in terms of the cumulative impact of various different new businesses and things of that nature around the area. And that said, I suppose this application is quite good in a way, because it isn't another storage unit or another high density site. So I would be interested to know if the two buildings at the front there, if they are dormant at the moment, or whether there is any activity going on there, because if there is, then that obviously could have an impact on the existing car parking space. Obviously, at the moment, the picture shows there's nobody there. But if there's already regular numbers of cars there, then we need to safeguard the lane not having cars parked on it or extra traffic in that area. So I would like a clarification on that point. I am minded to support the application because I think it's quite a neutral countryside activity. I wonder in terms of whether we could give a little bit back to the residents in terms of whether it be possible, Andrew, if we could, excuse me, if we could have a slightly later start on a Sunday, taking into account the fact that, you know, Sunday is a day when people possibly are more likely to be at home. So maybe a 9 o'clock start could be put into an amendment there. I know it's not an awful lot, but it gives a little bit of acknowledgement. I think it's a big site. It's away from the street. There's several fields there. The maximum number of 6 dogs. The time frames there are pretty good. So I'm happy to support this. If you could just clarify those 2 points. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, dealing with the buildings one first, the buildings are not part of the application site. So the application includes the access point, the track that you can see in front of those buildings, and then it comes around to the rear. There is parking provided, if I just show you on the site plan, there is parking areas provided here. So this is the access point is here, that track comes around the buildings and round to the rear here. So there's parking areas shown here for parking to use this area of the site, and then there's parking areas shown around the back for those using this part of the site. So it would be possible to, and those are subject to existing conditions. So there are parking areas that are for the site that would not impact on pushing people onto the lane or the operation of those buildings. The buildings that you see in the picture are in this white area that's outside the site. They have been, and to greater or lesser degrees, are still being used for purposes, for storage purposes. That's currently the subject of an enforcement investigation. We visited the site and spoke to the landowner yesterday about that. So this, I understand there's a scaffolding company operating out of there. I understand there has been a traffic management company operating out of there, and they're no longer on site. And there are some other roofing companies storing machinery there and that sort of thing. So there are some commercial uses taking place there. They are, like I said, subject to enforcement inquiry, and if they were to be retained, they would need to be the subject of a further planning application, in which case we would be looking to ensure that there is appropriate parking and operational details for those buildings. But that is outside of this site, and therefore is not something that impacts on the decision that we make today on that matter. In terms of the hours point that you made, clearly the council can impose conditions that are reasonable and appropriate. So if the committee decides that a later start on a Sunday is a reasonable and appropriate restriction on this development, then that would be perfectly within the committee's capabilities to impose a revision to that condition.
Councillor Evans.
Thank you. Thanks for that clarification. That sheds a little bit of light on the subject. I appreciate that you look at these things in silos, but it concerns me a little bit that because presumably it's the same owner operator of the sheds and the proposed site, and it's a little bit concerning that we are considering an application from this applicant when there is already something which has not been resolved, which is in breach of rules. Scaffolding companies, I'm well aware of another site down there, Great Birchwood, which is causing quite a lot of problems, which again is a scaffolding business, and those wagons are coming in on a daily basis, and that in itself is a noisy activity, as you can imagine. Scaffolding poles being lodged onto the back of flatbed trucks at various times of the day. So, you know, while I appreciate and understand that they're two separate things, surely it would be expedient of us to actually get one resolved before we pass planning on the other one. But yeah, that doesn't sit particularly well. I would definitely like to see a 9 o'clock start on a Sunday. Well, thank you.
Just to clarify, bring Councillor well, I'm going to bring Councillor Goodman in first because she's been waiting, and then I'll bring Councillor Collins in. Yeah, I was just going to ask for clarification regarding that, because I think of the advice sometimes when it's with regard to applications that you judge the application in terms of what is before you rather than other peripheral issues.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to
Get
reiterate.
clarification.
I just wanted to reiterate that point that we must make a decision on the application that's in front of us. Whilst there may well be, and obviously there are enforcement investigations taking place around other buildings in the family ownership, that cannot influence the decision that we make on this planning application, which must be determined on its own merits. There are other land, the family has other land holdings and they've submitted other applications in the area. Those are not relevant to that. So an activity at this particular building that is adjacent to the site is equally not relevant to the decision that we make on the planning application here, which is solely for dog fields and the use of the land around the edge of these buildings, or some of the land around the edge of these buildings, for parking associated with that dog field use.
I think you make a good point about the possible later start on a Sunday morning in terms of 9 o'clock. So that's something we can consider as a committee. Councillor Goodman.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. Given the rural location and the fact that there is no actual site office there as such, do we know how well the area, the site itself, will be both monitored and maintained?
Yeah, in terms of monitoring, I've explained that there's going to be a keypad system. The applicant actually lives in the farmhouse alongside the buildings. But in terms of monitoring the use, there's this keypad arrangement that they use to control access to the site, an online booking arrangement to make sure that attendance at the site is planned and managed in that respect. In terms of the physical maintenance of the site, that's an element of the management plan that's now covered by the expanded scope of Condition 9 as covered in the late observations. So that deals with making sure that the grass is mown and kept at a level that's going to be suitable for it to use, which essentially it's a requirement of the business to operate, that if the grass isn't mown, then the dogs won't be able to exercise in it. So there is a self-fulfilling element to that, but the management plan documents that and confirms that needs to be complied with. So I feel that revised condition in the late observations gives us the confidence of that the scheme would operate appropriately.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Chair. The buildings on the bottom right-hand corner of that plan, are they the buildings that had the storage facility application a few months ago?
We had an application at a site called Tunstead's Farm, which is here.
Yeah.
So that building there, the one that's on the southern boundary there with the green field, that was subject to a change of use application that was granted by committee 2 or 3 committees ago. If you recall.
I accept what you say, that it's not relevant. We've got to look at this application on its own, but there is a cumulative impact down Greenhouse Lane. But looking at this application on its own, I walk my dogs basically into Preston, into Lear Town. There's a dog walking area halfway down Darkinson Lane. I walk past there there's no noise, there's no, you know, you wouldn't know it was there unless the sound was there. So looking at this on its own, I can't see any objection to it at all. I'll be supporting the application. Thank you, Chair.
I'm just going to invite members for any further comments or indeed questions, etc. Or have we got to the stage where we're likely to be able to consider this? Councillor Evans, are you going to propose?
Yes, I'll propose.
And are you going to, in your proposal, suggest the amendment regarding the 9 o'clock start on a Sunday morning?
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to do that. I think it would be helpful if we could put that amendment in for 9 o'clock start Sunday, and I'm happy to propose.
Okay. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Collins. With the amendment of 9 o'clock start on a Sunday, we have a proposer in Councillor Evans. And
there's also the mention of CCTV.
Oh yes, the consideration as well. Would some consideration be useful in terms of CCTV, notwithstanding what Councillor Dixon said, that in terms of noise, that is not going to be greatly helpful, but it might reassure people in terms of extra surveillance.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would, on the basis of the fact that the site's not necessarily going to be manned, and if they're saying that there's a maximum number of dogs on the site, that it would be useful.
Okay, I'm just going to let the officer come back before we go to the vote.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that for members then. In terms of the recommendation that we've got, when I find the right page, we're on page 85. So we have conditions 1 and 2 unamended. We have condition 3, where the late observation talks about amending the hours from 8 to 8 to what's in the plan. That would now be amended to include a 9 o'clock start on a Sunday. Then we've got an amendment to condition 9 on the agenda papers to reflect the late observations, which rewords that to relate it to the management plan. And then there will be an additional condition, which would relate to the submission of, prior to the use commencing, the submission of a scheme of CCTV camera operation, including the location and monitoring location of the cameras and the monitoring arrangements for that CCTV. I'm kind of looking at the agent to who confirms that that's something that wouldn't be an issue to them. So that's the recommendation I think that Councillor Evans and Councillor Collins are presenting to us.
I'll come to Councillor Collins in a second, but I think that particular measure should add some reassurance in terms of surveillance and activity on the site. So it's an additional layer, and as I say, should provide some assurance. Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to say that if the operators thought that CCTV was necessary, they would have had it in the application, and if it became necessary as time passes, they could put it in then. I was going to say, I don't see it as a necessary item, and it's just an additional expense that might not be necessary. But if the agent's happy with it, I'm quite happy to go with that.
I was going to say, if the agent's happy to do that, then that would be something that I think at least would be helpful. How effective it might be is another thing, but it's certainly a move in the right direction. So with those particular amendments, are we all clear that we're voting for? All those in favour, please indicate.
That's unanimous, Chairman.
That's unanimous. Thank you, members, and thank you, speakers, for your contribution this morning. It was very helpful. Thank you. Right. Thank you, members. Welcome to members of the public who look very relaxed up there in the sunshine coming through the windows. There we are. And you're very welcome to be part of this session. So thank you for coming. We're going to move on now to item 1, which is land north and south of Old House Lane, Westby with Plumptons, which has a lovely ring to it, doesn't it? Westby with Plumptons. And you find that on page 5 of your report. There are no speakers on this particular item. So basically, I will go to Rob Buffham, who is the officer concerned with this particular application. He will give a full and detailed presentation, and then after that, we will go to questions and debate from members. So over to you, Rob.
Thanks, Chair. Good morning, everyone. So we are considering this morning agenda item 1, which is 23/0867. That seeks consent, outline consent with access applied for and all other matters reserved for a residential development of up to 266 dwellings. The application site is identified as red on the left-hand image. Let me just get my laser pointer on. So the application site is identified in red on the left. The aerial image perhaps gives a little bit of context to where the application site is. It's in the White Hills estate, so we have the M55 corridor running along the north. That links down to Progress Way, which is a continuation of Squiresgate Lane that runs to the edge of the borough. We have B&Q. We have the White Hills Employment Estate in this locality, and then we have the relatively new Wayne Homes residential development located to the west, and a caravan park also to the west. So that is the application site. That's an aerial image took from the southwest. So it's in a mixed-use area. We have the Wayne Homes housing to the west, caravan. We've got employment units to the northwest. We've got the main employment area of White Hills to the south and to the east. There are pockets of residential on the site at the moment. So we've got an island site of 2 pairs of semi-detached units here. We've got a pair of semi-detached houses to the north on Old Houses Lane. There's a pair of semi-detached houses in this location, and there's also a farmhouse and bungalow situated towards the eastern boundary. Members will also recall a recent application that they considered probably about 2 committees ago, which approved employment development on land to the north. The approximate boundary is in that location there. And members will recall as part of that scheme there was an acoustic fence line along this boundary, retention of hedgerows, obviously to facilitate and ease the passage of housing on this site. Just a few photos for you. We have Westby close to the east, which is proposed to be the main access arrangement into the development. We have an access arrangement to the west, which is also referred to in the submission as a potential access arrangement. Top left-hand image, that's a snapshot along the western boundary, along that approximate route where you can see an existing hedge line and houses. Houses have either a rear-facing aspect or a side-facing aspect towards the application site. As I mentioned, there are some existing pockets of housing. The 2 left-hand images, they relate to these houses to the northern boundary. These houses have a rear-facing aspect and a side-facing aspect towards the south in the application site. That the frontage, as can be seen in the left-hand image, that faces north away from the application site. This property to the right, that's situated in this location to the north of the woodland group, that has a front-facing aspect towards that woodland group. This middle photograph, that's just a snapshot taken along Old House Lane taken from the west, looking in an easterly direction, which obviously shows the hedge planting which can be seen either side of Old House Lane. The building group, the residential group to the east, that can be seen in the right hand photo. You got a bungalow positioned here, and then there's a 2-story farmhouse just sited to the north. Sorry? The bungalow? The farmhouse, okay, thank you. The image to the left, that is an open space that sits in front of these houses. And the image to the bottom left hand corner is just a snapshot from Old House Lane of the open space and field, which is positioned to the north. These photographs, they just illustrate the building group, the residential houses, which form an island site on the application site. So this bottom left image, that's a snapshot taken from approximately this location. And then the 2 images above, just to the frontages of the houses. These photographs just demonstrate shots looking from the application site outwards. So the top left, that's looking in a southerly direction towards this boundary here. The top right hand image, that's taken approximately this location, looking in a easterly direction towards this employment unit and the Westby Closed Access Arrangement, which is sited just behind this hedgerow. And the bottom left hand image is a snapshot from the southwestern corner. And as you can see there, that highlights there's a pylon line that runs through the site. Those that aren't familiar with pylon lines, there are building easements which prohibit buildings and structures underneath those pylon lines and within a certain distance of those pylon lines, obviously having a knock-on effect for the developable area on that site, but it does allow for the provision of public open space and road infrastructure. So, development proposals. Obviously we are just looking at the access arrangement as opposed to the housing layout. So the housing layout that you can see in front of you is just for indicative purposes. From an access perspective, the main access arrangement is via a continuation of Westby Close in that direction here. We also have in the scheme the potential future access arrangement from Pankhurst Way to the southwest. There's an existing public right-of-way that goes across the site. That is in approximately this location. And like I said, that from an assessment perspective, we are just looking at the access arrangements and the technical matters as opposed to that layout that's in front of us. So, main issues. Principal perspective, we have development locational policies. They focus development towards settlement boundaries, the housing, employment and mixed use allocations within 4 strategic locations within the borough. One of those locations is the Fylde Blackpool periphery, which Whitehills forms part of. The site is also located within the settlement boundary of Whitehills. That settlement boundary is defined by this grey line that runs around the proposals map, just embedded to the right hand image. The site also forms part of a mixed use allocation. So the mixed use allocation is MUS1, which is the orange colour that you see. Obviously the red line indicates the application site, so you can see it forms part of that allocation. That allocation itself is expected to deliver 529 homes and 5.7 hectares of employment land. So in terms of existing delivery, there are 225 houses on the site at the moment on the mixed use allocation, apologies. So those 225 houses are located to the west in the Wayne Homes scheme. The proposal therefore would result in the provision of 491 dwellings across the allocation, which is a deficiency of 38 units when compared to what the mixed use allocation of 529 homes requires. Notwithstanding that though, albeit there is a deficiency provision, it still obviously makes a significant contribution towards the housing supply. Obviously, with the amount of housing that's constructed and proposed, that will reduce the amount of available employment land, with approximately 2.3 hectares remaining. That obviously will restrict the amount of employment land that can be delivered within the allocation, and also obviously the amount of overall provision of employment land within the borough. Some members might recall an identical application for housing being approved by planning committee. That relates back to 2015, and I think it was originally approved by committee in 2017. That application approved 265 dwellings on the application site, but also acknowledged in that assessment that it would also deliver a shortfall of employment land on the allocation. So bearing all those matters into consideration, on balance, officers feel that yes, the proposal does reduce the amount of employment land available, but the benefits of housing supply and as well as the planning history allow us to recommend support for the principle of residential development. Obviously, another main issue for consideration is the access proposals and highways. That assessment is relative to the acceptability of the access design, as well as the increased number of vehicles that will be using surrounding roads. We have policies GD7 and H2, which basically say that we shouldn't be prejudicing highway safety or pedestrian safety. And obviously the proposal scheme makes the main focus for access from Westby Close, but also acknowledges that there could be potential access in the future through the Wayne Homes development from Pankhurst Way. The application was submitted with a transport assessment. The summary of the findings are below. That indicates there's been 2 road collisions from 2017 onwards. The site is in a sustainable and accessible location. Obviously, the scheme will put a great number of vehicles on the road. It's expected to generate 156 two-way trips in the peak hour in the morning and 176 in the PM peak in the afternoon. But that is equivalent to less than 3 two-way trips between both peak hours. The transport assessment also recognises that 2 of the roundabouts on Lytham St Anne's Way, which are these 2 you can't see them typically. Sorry. There are 2 roundabouts in approximately in this location and in this location under that aerial image. That is on Lytham St Anne's Way, which is obviously one of the main routes out of the borough. But that impact in the transport assessment isn't reported to be significant or severe. The scheme also included a travel plan which provides commitment towards promotion of alternative modes of transport, and that is aimed at the occupants of new housing. We don't have any objections from the Highway Authority, Blackpool Council Highway Authority or the National Highway Authority. The County Authority, they recognise that the access through to the Wayne's home site should be restricted to emergency vehicles and or the public access by public transport should the needs arise in the future. They also request £84,000 per year for 5 years towards the provision of a bus service within the White Hills area. We also need to consider residential amenity, and we have policy GD7 that requires relationships to ensure a sympathetic relationship to surrounding neighbours, which includes residents, but also the employment units. Assessment relates to the disturbance of neighbouring dwellings from increased vehicles and the associated road noise. But we need to bear in mind obviously that the layout of housing isn't for consideration at this time. The proposed access route won't pass by any housing, thus there's no impact as a consequence. There is an acknowledgement that the Wayne home site could be used by emergency vehicles or public transport in the future. Obviously that will put those vehicles within the Wayne home site, and obviously the noise associated to those vehicles could have an impact on amenity. But the vehicle use and road speeds associated to those vehicles are going to be low, So we don't consider there's going to be sufficient harm to neighbour amenity to warrant refusal of the proposal. There will be construction disturbance, but as we all know, that is inevitable through construction, and we can impose sufficient safeguards to make sure there aren't any, or to minimise, shall I say, amenity to existing residents. There is an extraction flue. I thought I put it in my photographs. I obviously haven't. There's an extraction flue which you can perhaps just see on that industrial unit there. That serves a car repair business. Potential odour and noise disturbance as a consequence of that extraction. And as a consequence of that extraction, then there's a requirement for the submission of noise and odour reports within the reserved matters. So that will obviously consider the relationship of that industrial unit to new housing and suggest any mitigation if it's found as to be an issue. Ecology. Excuse me. So policy ENV2, that presents a commitment towards protection and enhancement of biodiversity and geological issues. The application was accompanied with an ecological assessment that concluded that the site is dominated by species poor grassland that will be lost as a result of the development. There are a number of hedgerows on site. The hedgerow assessment that was included with the ecology assessment, that concludes that there's going to be 987 metres of habitat retained, while 947 metres could be lost as a consequence. What we need to bear in mind, though, is that the layout is only indicative. The applicant or house builder at the time of the reserve matters also has consideration of that issue and could incorporate more hedgerows or retain more hedgerows within the final layout scheme. There are bat roofs within buildings that are proposed to be demolished. The assessment that includes a methodology for that demolition. It also recognises that lighting within the final scheme needs to be sensitive to minimise impact on foraging and any replacement roosting that may be required for bats. It also considered all of the protected species and did not report any significant harm to those species. It did look to consider how best to avoid any kind of disturbance if species were found during the construction process. The proposal also included a shadow habitat regulation assessment, and that concluded that there was no impact on the special protection areas subject to mitigation. That mitigation is relative to homeowner packs for new occupants of the development, and that's to raise awareness of the importance of these designated sites, but also the provision of the public open space areas. The reasoning for the provision of that public open space areas is to provide an alternative for dog walking on site, as opposed to potentially using those designated sites for those means. Our consultant ecologists comment that the outline nature of the application doesn't allow for an accurate assessment of the habitat loss or retention at this time. They do advise that those habitats, such as the hedgerows, should be retained as much as possible, and any compensation must be made for within the landscaping of the site or by off-site creation. They also advise that a method statement associated to the demolition of buildings should be undertaken, and also suggest conditions to minimise disturbance for the protected species. Natural England, they are a statutory consultancy on the shadow habitat regulation assessment, and they offer no objection, subject to obviously implementation of the mitigation measures that have been advised. Biodiversity wise, the proposals do report a net loss. That net loss is 7.5 units of biodiversity, 1.8 hedgerow units. That must be compensated for on-site or off-site. Those details will be required at reserve matter stage, and at that time we'll be able to say categorically what the net gain, or whether there's a net loss, or whether or not there's a need for off-site compensation as a consequence. Viability. So policies H4 and INF2, they require affordable housing and financial contributions. Those contributions are outlined below. They are quite significant. So, for example, the primary contributions, they're up to 1.8 million for expansion of either Mayfield or St Thomas's primary schools, or up to 2.2 million for the provision of a new school at Windyke. There's also contribution requests for secondary spaces, and that's just over 900,000. There's healthcare contributions for 2 medical centres within the Blackpool area. Obviously, we have the highway contributions of £420,000 over a 5-year period for the bus transport requirements, and then there's also £80,000 for travel plan monitoring, as well as potential provision for off-site biodiversity. The applicant has submitted a viability appraisal, and that is based upon the background of policies INF4 and INF2, which do allow for reduced amounts of affordable housing and financial contributions where those contributions would make the development unviable. The applicant's viability appraisal, that has evidenced that the scheme isn't viable as a result of those contributions, could support up to £600,000 of financial contribution, or between 5 and 10% of affordable housing. As part of the assessment of that viability appraisal, we employ a company called Kepi Massey. So it's obviously their job to basically go through the appraisal and make sure that it all makes sense. Basically, there's no holes in there. There is disagreement at the moment concerning the viability appraisal. That could mean that the £600,000 that's reported, or the 5 and 10% affordable housing, could increase. Those discussions are still ongoing, though, with the applicant. Notwithstanding that position of disagreement, Kepi Massey also advised that a repeat viability appraisal should be undertaken at the reserve matters stage. So that will give us an up-to-date position at that stage of the final viability, which will obviously influence the financial contributions and help members decide at the reserve matters stage in terms of how best to prioritise those contribution amounts. From an officer perspective, we don't think there's any reason why determination of the plan application can't be made. We've suggested a resolution that enables officers to continue dialogue concerning the viability, and a Section 106 agreement that will require all of the financial contributions in full, unless the reserve matters viability appraisal demonstrates that the scheme isn't viable. At that time, at the reserve matters time, members will then be able to prioritise the financial contribution expenditure, whether that's contributions towards affordable housing on site, or whether it's to contributions towards education, to health, or indeed an apportionment across the whole of those financial contributions. What I would say, though, is that approval of this current plan application will establish the principle of development. So it will establish residential development on that site. And that principle of residential development cannot be revisited at the reserve matters stage. And that's irrespective of the viability position that's demonstrated by the applicant at the reserve matters stage. On that basis, and because there's no other technical reasons to warrant refusal of the development, the application is recommended to the committee, and for that to be delegated to the head of planning, subject to the completion of a Section 106 agreement, subject to the affordable housing infrastructure contributions, unless at the reserve matters stage that the collection of those contributions would make the development unviable, adoption of the shadow HRA, and a schedule of appropriate conditions. Members should also just refer to the observations, which also just suggests a further condition to be added to the committee papers. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Yes, it's quite a complex proposal here, and there are a lot of nuances within it, and So I'm looking forward to the questions from members. Councillor Evans, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Rob, for the presentation. Just a matter of clarity, if you could, Chair, for me. Reserve matters, because we're looking at the outline for accessibility of the site here today, that's what we're primarily looking at, but we've gone down into quite a lot of the detail about the overall site and the viability of the site. But am I to understand that reserve matters then get decided by officers, delegated officers, or do they come back to a planning meeting at a later stage?
Yes, so we are considering an outline application today. The matters applied for are just solely related to access. So the main issues that we're considering is the principle of residential development on the site, the access arrangements, plus any relevant technical matters, such as ecology, for example, flood risk and drainage. Scheme of delegation, that will require the reserve matters to come back to planning committee because it's a major application.
That's great, thank you, because that's good for clarity, because there are some concerns from United Utilities about the flood and drainage systems in there, so I would like the opportunity to look at those. But on the basis of the fact that the majority of the application comes back at a later stage, I'm happy to move.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I mean, you just said it is quite a complex one, this, but for me at the second, it's not. It's purely outline, and we've already given permission for a housing development on this site. I think it's very difficult for us not to give outline development. I do have some issues with it, with looking at the details, with the biodiversity loss, with the drainage, but those are matters that are going to come back to us for a full planning application, and if we're not happy with them, we can say no to them then. So I'm happy to support it as an outline at this stage. Certainly.
Thank you. On one of the slides, it showed a public right of way. It starts there. Where does it end? Where does it go through that site? So it will be left. I mean, because you said that is just like a mock-up plan, isn't it, of the housing development?
Yeah.
So that would have to remain open.
Development doesn't not have to retain the route of the existing public right of way. That route can be diverted, but obviously that's subject to separate legislation as well. So when the reserve matters comes in, the applicant has the option to retain the public right of way as it is at the moment. They could propose to divert it, which is fine, but they would still have to go through a separate process of diversion. If that process of diversion isn't supported, then they would be back to the drawing board basically, and to a position whereby they would have to then retain it.
Because it needs to be kept in the plans and in front of us. There is this public right of way, because quite often these they get forgotten about, and people and they get lost in time, and then nobody knows they exist, and then they're gone. Once they're gone, they're gone.
The Highway Authority, they do have a public rights of way officer who we do consult plan applications. They advise on the process, but because it is subject to separate legislation, and that legislation could result in retention of that footpath, then they tend to hold back really. They wait to see what the reserve matter scheme obviously will say in this circumstance. At the moment, that layout is only indicative, so we don't know for sure whether the footpath will be retained in its current situation, or whether or not it would be diverted as a consequence.
Yeah, I just keep when it comes back to us as a for a full planning matter, then I think it needs to be made sure that we know where that is then, if we can. And then what flood plain number is that this area on?
It's in flood zone 1.
Okay. Because one of the pictures showed the field already bogged up with water.
Yeah, I go to that's a low lying area of the site itself. And as you can see, there has been a bit of rain recently in those pictures. The members will also consider this. If I can watch that one, there we go. site has been recently brought to committee for housing as well. That site is actually in flood zone 3. So there are flood zone areas within the wider White Hills area, but yeah, this application site is in flood zone 1.
So again, that's gonna, when all the matters come back, it's gonna have to have whatever mitigating.
Yeah, I think because it's in flood zone 1 though, there aren't any flood risks to the development. So the main issues for the reserve matters in terms of flood risk and drainage are primarily to do with the surface water drainage system, as opposed to consideration of flood protection measures, because they're not needed because it's only in flood zone 1.
Flood zone 3 is across the road. It's a little bit difficult, isn't it? Think, you know, who designed the divide line there? And sorry, last question. In the viability studies, at what level is profitability for the developer considered?
The profitability in this sector, I think it's 20%.
Okay.
Now, the planning practice guidance for viability, that sets a field. Well, it's something between 18 and 20% with an acceptable kind of range of profit margin. And that is set at the high level. Now, obviously, through the dialogue that we're having with Kepi Massey will be looking at the profit margins, whether or not they're suitable for this development, and obviously discussing that with the applicant.
Yes, Chairman. Basically, viability is assessed using a standard methodology, which everyone's signed up to. Obviously, within that, there is opportunity, as we've seen here, there's opportunities of agreement as to the evidence that goes into the assessment, the actual process, and how you incorporate the element of profit to a developer. That's all sort of set out in the sort of standard methodology. Before that was in place, there used to be different ways of assessing viability. So you used to get conflict between a developer wanting to assess it one way and a local authority wanting to assess it in a different way, and they come up with different answers. So that for clarity, there is a set process. So that's what's followed, and that's why we employ Kepi Massey to make sure that they argue the strongest possible point for the council, because we do not have in-house those sort of surveying skills to secure that.
Because the actual spend, the list of money that's wanting to spend is an awful lot more than £600,000, isn't it? An awful lot more. So, I mean, there's a big difference between what the developer wants to pay and what's expected as such.
It is, certainly. Obviously, the £600,000 or the 5 to 10 percentage of affordable housing, that is something that's within the applicant's appraisable as being capable of being delivered. So members should really expect that as being the minimum amount, and through negotiations with Kepi Massey, that could increase dependent upon agreement of the matters that are outstanding.
Yeah, because it just seems, in this day and age, the way things are going, to lose affordable housing on the back of profitability from a big development, I don't like that. But
it doesn't just come down to profitability, though. There's consideration of abnormal costs, construction costs, as well. So it isn't just a pure profit exercise that's undertaken.
In reality, they're going to put the profit at the top end of what this consideration is, as opposed to all other costs, aren't they? Because they're not in the game they're not charities. So of course it's going to be about profit.
Just to reassure you, though, I mean the reference to using an independent consultant, Kepi Massey, and it's their role on behalf of the authority to challenge a particular submission, and they may go totally reject it. They might go, they've got a point here, justification for their case, whatever, and they may come back with different recommendations. That's right, isn't it? And that's a really important part of the protocol that applies to these situations, is that, you know, we have an agent acting on our behalf who will be testing and challenging the submission that they will be making. And so therefore, you know, when developers put forward, they will be aware of that. So, you know, and therefore the justification for their case will be scrutinised and will be challenged. And then they will make their recommendations to us in terms of, you know, well, they have a case there, but they don't have a case there, or whatever it might be. And it's a very important one, because obviously, you know, there is that level of profitability as well for developers to be able to use that.
I think, Chair, it's probably just important to re-emphasise that policies of the local plan and NPPF do allow for reduced affordable housing and reduced contribution amounts where it's shown that development isn't viable too. So there is that option available, certainly to members, to still support housing and the delivery of housing within the borough, subject to those reduced contribution amounts.
And just to add, the key decision, which was made that very clear, the key decision for members will be a reserved matters thing. It will come back, and you know, so it will. We will revisit that in terms of what is being proposed, but it will have been tested as well by Kepi Massey by that stage.
Chair, just picking up on that point though as well, the highlighted text in green. So I just want to make members clear to members that once the outline consent is approved, assuming that it goes through as per recommendation today, then that will verify the principle of residential development on the site. So once it comes to the reserve matter stage and we're considering the final viability position, if you will, we won't then be able to revisit the principle of residential development. It will be consideration of these are the well, this is the profitability in the scheme, this is the amount of contributions that are available, and it'll be a prioritisation process by committee to determine how best to spend the available funds.
Councillor, if it's okay, I'm going to bring Mark Evans in here, because I think we're getting to the nub of some of the issues here that I was sort of indirectly referring to earlier on.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, just to be clear, when we're talking about Section 106 agreements, those have got to be attached to the Planning Permission, and in an outline application, that is the Planning Permission. The reserve matters is not technically a planning permission in its own right. So the ground rules have to be established now, and that's what's set out in this report. In terms of when Rob mentions the fact that once a decision is issued, that's not the decision today. That's what, if the committee go along with a recommendation, they're delegating authority to myself to issue the decision, and therefore the cut-off period is when that decision is issued by me, if the committee delegate authority to me. So in terms of, it won't be actually today, but it'll be in several days or weeks' time, just to be clear on that particular matter. But what Rob's emphasising is that when it comes back to committee, it will have been approved in outline, and therefore committee will be looking at the reserve matters at that stage.
Okay. Okay. But and then the last point, sorry, the roosting bats and the ecology and the wildlife, etc. There are no set plans at the moment. Will they come all back in reserve matters? You know, how these creatures are going to be dealt with, and only from past experience, I've seen newts chucked in a bucket after a developer, and I've seen it happen in front of, and they've actually admitted it. You know, it's difficult to put these wildlife tracks and things when you're building a big estate. Of course it is, isn't it? The logistics of it. So it needs to be. How does that get secured within this permission?
Well, the fact survey work that's going to take today relates to buildings on site that can be demolished. Those are these buildings. Yeah, I think they've one partner in the former agricultural. So one of those buildings has been identified to support roosting bats. There's an outline methodology within the ecological assessment, but there's certain conditions requiring those methodologies for demolition to be agreed prior to the demolition. so that the bats on site obviously will be safeguarded. That could involve other elements of processes, so the equipment may have, for example, provide replacement roosting, temporary roosting, and then more permanent roosting in the development. Other mitigation measures could include bird nesting opportunities for the balance in those. But in terms of green infrastructure across the development, then obviously there are large opportunities to serve the existing woodland that's being retained and enhanced. We have this linkage through the site underneath the pylon line. That also follows through into the Wayne Homes development as well. And then obviously that links out onto the moss. So there are linkages, there have to be linkages within the scheme because of the pylon line. It makes a very good use of that land to provide those linkages where obviously you can't provide the development. So there is opportunity there. Again, at this time, we don't know what the final layout is. So,
But because of those pylons and those overhead wires, that has to exist.
yeah.
They can't, well, they could put a road underneath it, can't
Can't
they?
put housing or structures underneath pylon lines or within certain.
But you could put a road on it.
Of, you could put public open space, you could put roads, parking areas, and then. So obviously.
Roads wouldn't mitigate the ecology.
No,
would it?
but as you can see, just on this indicative layout, that the majority of that area underneath the pylon line is set aside for public open space and landscape.
But it's only an indicative layout. And that's,
I think Mark wanted to come in as well, make a brief point. Thank you.
Yes, just a very brief point on that is if you do see somebody putting great crested newt or other protected species into a bucket and they don't have a licence, which one presumes that if they're doing that they won't, please report it to the local police.
yeah,
So,
I did.
Because they will enforce the protection
Yeah.
that those have. And I believe
so
that
those
Lancashire
buildings-
still have a rural crime
Where the bats
facility.
are roosting at the moment, they can't be knocked down until the plan's in place to, yeah,
They'll need a licence from Natural England.
right.
There's a conditions advised which requires that licence, if ultimately required by Natural England, to be submitted with us. As part of that licensing, they will also have to agree with Natural England how to deal with those bats on site.
Will
through
we
the
get
construction
notification of that as part of the next upcoming, the actual final plan?
There will not necessarily the license, because the license part of the condition that just requires the license to be submitted prior to demolition of the buildings. So that will be post the reserve matters. But obviously it's something that the applicant's consultants are aware of. It's something that ourselves and our ecology consultants are aware of. It'll be something that Natural England will be aware of because they have to go through the licensing process to verify whether or not a license is actually needed to
So it's
do
going to
with
be
the bats.
underpinned with various agencies.
So it's not something that's going to slip between the cracks, so to speak.
Yeah, hope not. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Andrews, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Not very far from this development, I've recently had a neighbour dispute because there wasn't enough parking spaces. So can we assume that all of these houses are going to have, say, 2 parking spaces off the road, i.e. on their own land? And I think I can see facility there for some lay-bys. Because if a house has 2 cars and a visitor comes, you need to park 3 cars, and before very long, you can't go along the road. I know this in one of the very green wards, but also as the one close to there just isn't enough parking on the road.
I think, Councillor Andrews, if you don't mind me intervening, I think that is an issue for reserved matters stage rather than outline planning permission.
Well, can we confirm that I can see lay-bys on that plan? At least I think I can.
I'll leave it to the officers to confirm whether I'm right on that. But
Yeah, so
just pointing out.
as Chair has referred, the layout that we see in front of us is indicative. So the driveway areas and I can't see any lay-by areas, correct me if I'm wrong, but they would be only shown indicatively at this time anyway. The council has car parking standards within their recently adopted supplementary planning document, which requires a certain amount of parking spaces for different types of dwellings. So 1 and 2 bedroom dwellings, they have to provide 1 parking space. 2 spaces for 3 bedroom dwellings, and then 3 spaces for 4 bedroom dwellings or more. That's all expected to be provided within curtilage so that it doesn't displace parking either onto the roads within the housing estate or the wider business park. Now, I know I've dealt with a number of applications within Whitehills. Committee members have dealt with a number of applications in Whitehills as well, and we are all aware of the parking problems within the wider housing estate. Notwithstanding that, obviously you mentioned visitor spaces. Visitors do tend to turn up to houses from time to time, and it's inevitable that there will be some, I think, parking on the street, but that will be associated to visitors as opposed to occupants of the development.
Thank you. Can I just confirm on your indicative map then, am I right in seeing there's lay-bys in the lower left-hand corner?
That there?
Well, just further up, north of that. There, yes.
Yeah, they look like lay-bys.
So this is for visitor parking or to allow emergency vehicles to get past?
I haven't a clue what they're for.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
They're the only place where they are. They're potentially.
Yeah, I just wanted to underline the importance of having adequate parking for people that reside there and visitors.
And those are pertinent questions at the next stage, so thank you for raising it. Okay. Councillor Griffiths, please.
Thank you, Chair. The existing properties on this site, are they all on septic tanks?
I'm unsure. There is an objection from one of the residents relating to the outfall from a septic tank
So the
and the development affecting that. Now, obviously, if the development at the reserve matter stage, once you know what the layout is, does affect that septic tank, then obviously the applicant will then have to deal directly with the affected landowner,
right,
to come up with some kind of drainage solution for them.
Yeah. So Old House Lane is a private road.
Yes.
And in the comments, there's also some issues with that land. They feel like they're losing some of it.
So Old House Lane runs along the northern boundary of the site in an east-west axis. It then also continues along here to serve access to this building group, but it also continues along this road to provide access to these 2 pairs of semi-detached dwellings.
Yeah.
Neighbours have put in writing to us that they have private rights of access over Old House Lane, and that there is ongoing dialogue between themselves and Natural England, Homes England, to deal with that matter. At the moment, the access strategy is to have dwellings accessed via Westby Close, and that will involve removing this link. So the road that links to these houses is removed on the indicative layout. As you can see there, that just is a footpath. There's no actual road now linking to these properties. But what these properties do have is an alternative access arrangement still to use Westby Close. Now, it is a private matter. It is something which is a private matter between the 2 parties. Now, if that private matter can't be resolved between the 2 parties, then obviously that could affect the access strategy. It could result in the retention of that road to these 2 semi-detached properties. If that's the case, then obviously the access that's approved at the moment can't be implemented, and the applicant will then have to revisit their access strategy to ensure that this private access road is retained for those properties.
Right.
But
so
it's
that
all
will
subject,
come back.
It's all subject to the dialogue that Homes England, as the applicant, will have with the affected home jobs. Which is zero. Well, as an officer, I've been speaking to Homes England. I've also spoken to owners of these properties who have confirmed that there is a dialogue.
I think I should point out that we don't normally accept interventions from the pub. Yeah, I appreciate that, but I'm just going to close that down now, okay, if you don't mind. Thank you.
But just following on from that point, Chair, obviously that there needs to be a resolution between all parties and affected homeowners. And if there isn't an agreement, then in theory, that will affect the access strategy and could result in obviously this private road being reinstated to these properties.
Right. Thank you.
Okay.
Councillor Pittman, please.
Thank you, Chair. I am concerned about the loss of the employment land. Basically, homes are fine, great, but people need jobs, and it wouldn't have been classified as employment land if that wasn't the case. I'm led to believe that basically the profitability of this is linked to building more houses, which has led to the loss of the employment land, so that only 2.3 remains. What is going to be is there going to be any other employment land available to make up this deficit, or basically is it just lost forever and you know the local plan has to accept, oh, homes are more important than giving people work? It does concern me, because it would appear that some sort of agreement has been made. Oh, if you give up employment land, this will be more viable, more profitable. But it's not viable at the end of the day, as far as we can see. So, can you just clarify what the situation is on employment land for filed as a result of this?
I'm going to ask the officers to respond to that, because I think it's a very good question that some people would be considering. So,
yeah, thanks, Chairman. Yeah, in terms of the position, I mean, first of all, this site is allocated as a mixed-use site, so it was always expected that there will be a mixture of housing and employment. And in the plan, we estimate how that split will come up to pass. And obviously, in this case, it's looking like it's more housing than employment than we originally anticipated. There are two things to take into account here. One is that there was a previous decision that this committee made that sort of did the same thing. So it's already, to be consistent, we should be having to take that into consideration as a material consideration. But notwithstanding that, in terms of the monitoring of the local plan, it's recognised that a number of employment sites aren't coming forward, but there are other employment opportunities coming forward at non-allocated sites. So actually, we've had quite a lot of employment on, you know, things like, as we were discussing on the previous application, some sort of farm buildings being converted. So they weren't included in the plan, but they have come forward and they've created the jobs which the plan is seeking to deliver. So in terms of the overall situation, yes, we might be losing, or this might be more housing orientated than employment orientated, but overall, in terms of the plan, what we are seeing is that there are a number of employment sites not coming forward, but they're coming forward, the jobs are coming forward elsewhere. We've commissioned a economic needs assessment, which is currently being drafted by consultants for us, and that's a piece of work being jointly that's been jointly commissioned by Blackpool, Fylde and Wyre, and that will inform issues such as the types of land that is needed, whether the parcels of land that are allocated currently are in the right places, of the correct sizes, and information of that nature, and that will inform how we move forward with the next iteration of the plan. So as we go forwards, the main issue will be to address those issues. As it stands at the moment, like I say, there are jobs being created elsewhere which are making up for some of these sites that might be lost.
I do think this is very important. The new government has a will to build more houses, but at the end of the day, there has to be that employment area, the employment areas that are going to occupy people. And I find it worrying that, yes, the employment land has gone for more housing, which obviously increases the profitability for the developer, but it's not viable at the moment. Could there possibly be more employment land lost because of that? It's just not stacking up in terms of the figures.
Chair, if I may, yeah. I mean, that is a position that's recognised in the framework in terms of allocated sites, and it's recognised in our local plan policies. That if allocated sites don't come forward for the purpose that they're allocated for, and subject to demonstrating to the satisfaction of the council that those sites aren't coming forward, then the policies do allow for alternative uses to be brought forward for those. The planning system is obviously intended to introduce an element of certainty. So the plan-led system is intended to introduce an element of certainty, not just responding to individual applications. But the plan-led system is also to be flexible to enable changing circumstances. And so, like I say, that's always the challenge. It is not a system of the plan says yes, therefore it should be granted. There are always these many competing issues that need to be taken into account. So the policies that are set forward in the framework, obviously the big emphasis over the last, this consultation on the revised framework, the emphasis that's been in the media over the last sort of 24 hours is related primarily to housing, but there are sections in there that relate to creating a balanced economy and ensuring that the jobs are created as well. There's always an issue that if you're creating jobs, then the workers need somewhere to live, and you have to look at it in the whole rather than just looking at them as an individual separate subject.
Thanks.
And I just emphasise, I think the point has been made that, the committee has already made a previous decision regarding sort of this particular development in terms of the principle of residential development. And also the other point that just to emphasise is that it is a mixed-use site. So there was always going to be a sort of slight balance there in terms of how things came forward. But, thank you for that. I think you make some good points. Councillor Evans. Oh, I've got... Sorry.
Okay.
Well, I'm just reading the list and then Councillor Collins, is that okay? Yes, that's fine.
Further to the points I was making earlier on, really, Chair, that I still feel there's a little bit of confusion there to me anyway. I might be a bit slow on the uptake as to the reserve matters. We were just hearing before that once the decision has been made, that even though there's an awful lot still to be decided on this, once we accept the premise of accessibility, that we then are also accepting the fact that this is going to housing, and so we're looking at the smaller detail. But I would still suggest that there's an awful lot of detail still to be decided about this application. So the question I'd like from officers is why have officers decided to go down this particular route of having, if you like, a two-stage application as opposed to looking at the whole application in the round and being able to make an informed decision across the piece rather than a piecemeal, because it looks like we're deciding on something fairly innocuous today, but then that shuts down a lot of the potential debate at a future meeting. So I'm a little bit confused as to why we are where we are.
Well, I think it's basically the principle of residential development as well, which is a big thing for me. It's not a small thing. I think it's the other way around. But I'll let officers respond to you, Councillor Evans. Okay.
Yeah, Chairman, in terms of the officers choosing, the officers haven't chosen this. It's up to the applicants how they submit their application, and the UK planning system allows for full applications with all details submitted, or outline followed by reserved matters. So it's the applicants that have chosen to do this. It is a very common form of application in outline for housing, especially where the applicant is not intended to develop the site, because a lot of the detail, as was presented in the officer presentation, relates to the fact that this is how the site might be laid out, but it will be for the developer. Presumably, the site will be sold on to presumably one developer, but it might be sold on to more than one developer. They would come forward, for example, with their house types and the way in which they would see this site being built out. So what we're considering today are those, as the chairman says, those broad parameters. So is this site suitable for housing on this balance between housing and employment in terms of its overall allocation and the access points? Some of that, like I said, in terms of consistency and the material consideration, is the previous decisions, and obviously the development plan is the starting point. But in terms of those issues, I think the biggest area of unknowns at the moment is this issue regarding viability. But that would only be resolved by further discussions with technical discussions. And if our technical advisors are satisfied that those criteria have been met, then the policies say that we should be moving towards an approval of that balance. So like I say, the committee today are considering principles and will in the future be considering detail. So that's the way in which the split between the outline application and the reserved matters application will be made.
All right, thank you, Chair, for that clarification. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Chair. The number of houses, number of dwellings on the site, is that being fixed today at 266? Or when the reserved matters stage, could we say we think there should be more housing on this site, or there should be less housing on this site?
The description is up to 266 dwellings. So the 266 is a ceiling. They can't provide more reserved matters, but they could provide less. So they could provide up to 266.
Thank you. In the report, it states that there's 7.6 hectares of this plot being developed, and 2.4 hectares you've worked out as being provided for public open space. That's 10 hectares, which is an 11 hectare site. So what's happened to the other hectare?
Well picked up. I think what's got to be bearing in mind is that irrespective of what is the developable area, what areas of public open space, it is only an indicative layout. So at the end of the day, the hectareages which have been specified could very well alter at the reserve matters stage. The discrepancy could be down to such things as provision of roads, for example, within the scheme.
Right. Well, it's a strategic site for development. So policy H2 says 50% has to be, I think, 1 to 3 bedroomed. 50% can be above that. So looking at that, you can work out a minimum public open space requirement. If there's 133 one-bedroomed properties and 133 four-bedroom properties, and you can work out a maximum if there's 133 three-bedroomed and 133 five-bedroomed. Now, I've worked that out, and you have to double it because it's over 100 houses. So the maximum required is 2.2 hectares, and the minimum is 1.5. And the actual requirements will probably be somewhere between those two figures. But just looking at the minimum, 1.5 added to 7.6, that's 9.1 hectares. So we nearly got 2 hectares missing, if that was the scenario. You know, there's land missing here.
But again, I go back to the fact that it is only indicative, irrespective of the measurements and the hectareages which are quoted in the report, or the potential requirements of policy. It is only an indicative layout that we're looking at the moment. There's conditions in place which we're requiring the mix of affordable housing, the mix of units, so the 1, 2 and 3 bedrooms, which to be compliant with policy, the public open space requirements, they're all included as conditions to make sure the delivery of a development is compliant with the council's policies for housing mix, for density, for example, and for public open space. So irrespective of the potential hectareage issue within the scheme, there's still controls in place by condition to make sure that development comes forward that accords with plan application.
Councillor Collins, Mark just wants to ask a question. Is that
Sorry,
okay? Just a clarification.
Just clarification. So in those numbers that Councillor Collins has read out, there was mention of you're saying that the projecting things forward, there was a maximum of 2.2 hectares for public open space.
Yeah.
But earlier you said that there was 2.4 hectares of public open space proposed.
Well, it's the way it's worked out in the report. It's based on the requirement if all the housing was 5-bedroomed, and 5-bedroomed houses needs more public open space, and on that basis there's 2.4 hectares required. But the reality is it's going to be less than that.
Yeah.
So even taking that bigger figure, there's a hectare missing, but it's going to be less than that. So there's more land missing.
Well, no, there's not more land missing, is there? If I may,
Well, unaccounted
because the issue is that the policies require a minimum of those areas. So if there was a minimum requirement for 2.2 hectares, 2.4 hectares would be in accordance with that policy.
Yeah, well, it states the amount of land developed, the amount of public open space, and the total amount, and they should add up.
Well, as has been explained, if I may through you,
Well,
Chairman, there are other uses to the development area and the public open space.
Right. In the report, it says there's up to 35 dwellings per hectare. It states that in the report. But I didn't write the report, but it's in there, rest assured. But if you actually work it out, there's 266 houses. There's 11 hectares, and it actually works out the dwellings per hectare is 24. Now, this is a strategic location for development. I'm not arguing about whether it's for employment land or for residential. It's strategic, it's been identified, it's to be developed, and we should be making efficient use of that. And 24 dwellings per hectare is not efficient use. We should be looking at 30 dwellings per hectare. This is where the land's missing. This is where it's unaccounted for. If it was 30 dwellings per hectare, you'd have something like 332 dwellings on that site. So that's an extra 66 dwellings. They're talking about 10% affordable. Those 66 could be affordable to make it up to 30%. But if the figures don't add up, those 66 could be additional market housing, which adds to the viability of the site, which makes the developer's argument that, well, the site's not viable, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, it should be an efficient use of the site, and 24 dwellings per hectare is not an efficient use for this site.
Yeah, just to respond to that matter in terms of density, Paragraph 4 on page 29, that talks about the densities within the development. That recognises that taking the whole of the site area and dividing that by the number of units proposed equates to a density of 24 dwellings per hectare. But what that doesn't consider is the fact that some areas of the site cannot be developed upon. So the area underneath the pylon line, for example, can't be built under. So that restricts the number of houses or the areas of that site that can actually be developed. What the applicant has committed to, though, is to build it up to 35 dwellings per hectare in the areas of the site that they can build out on.
Through you, Chair. Yeah, if land can't be built on, it can be a public open space. Under cables, it can be public open space. If you look at the National Grid guidance, because the only thing you shouldn't be doing under cables is flying kites and fishing. Other uses are acceptable. So if the land isn't available for housing, it's available for public open space.
That drawing up there indicatively shows the pylon line route. So the central line is the pylon line. The two lines either side is the easement, which you can't build buildings and structures underneath. What that layout indicates is indicatively where the public open space is going to be. Logically, as you say, that makes sense to site the public open space in that area because you can't obviously build in that area. Now, if the other areas of the site, like I say, the applicant is committed to building up to 35 dwellings per hectare, we can go higher than that, but the likelihood is that that will result in a lot more terrace properties, or it could result in a lot more high-rise apartment blocks, which there's a design issue there to consider at that time. But at the moment, the developable areas which can be built out are confirmed to be built out at 35 dwellings per hectare. Notwithstanding that, there's also a condition requiring that the density of the development coming forward accords with the local plan policy. That local plan policy is a minimum of 30 dwellings per hectare.
But you've got to look at the site as a whole. It's an 11-hectare site. On that site, you've got developed land, you've got public open space. Add the two together, that's the total area. Now, some of the land can't be built on because of that, and that becomes public open space. But the dwellings per hectare, you're looking at the whole site. You can't just think, well, this section here, I've got 35 dwellings per hectare. This bit I've got none on. You've got to look at the whole site, and you should be looking at 30 dwellings per hectare on the whole site. This is land that's been identified for development, either employment or residential, and it's not delivering. And this means that if you haven't got the affordable there, you haven't got the total number of housings you need there, that land, that need is going to have to be provided somewhere else. I mean, we recently had an application in Clifton Village for 39 affordable houses on one site, and that was to accommodate need the other end of the borough. There's no need in Clifton as such, but this is land that's been identified for development. If you don't fully utilise it, you bring in other areas that haven't been identified, windfall sites or whatever. Like the housing that's missing off this, the 66 houses will take up something like 10% of the projected windfall sites from other areas of the borough. But the 66 houses, it could either be the other 20% affordable that's missing, or there could be 66 market houses which would make the scheme viable. So I think we really need to look at this again. I'm really not happy with it. We spend a lot of time looking at the local plan. We spend a lot of time identifying sites. This site's been identified. I mean, you're using up land here that's been identified for employment use when you could be squeezing more of the housing on the land that's been identified for housing. We really need to look at this again. I'm really not happy for it, and I propose we don't accept this today. I propose we refuse it. But we've heard from Councillor Pittman about the loss of employment land. We've heard from Councillor Nixon about the affordable and the viability. I mean, I share their concerns. I think we really need to give this back to the developer, the applicant, to look at it again. I'm really not happy with it. I don't know if I've got a second of that, but I propose refusal.
Chair, I'll second that, please.
Could we ask officers to respond to any points you made before we move on?
Well, I suppose the top and bottom of it is in terms of the answers that you've had from the officers. Those are the answers. If you look at that site, is it unusually low in density when you look at it in terms of the various spaces that need to be delivered, the biodiversity requirements, the open space, the shape of the site, which is not a nice sort of rectangle to allow you to get various requirements in. The area of land that has to be given over to sustainable drainage, the fact that there are parcels of existing properties in there which have to be built around and accommodated within the layout, all those types of things will impact on the overall density of a development. That my starting point, I suppose, will be how many houses would you be expected in the policy? What we're showing is that overall that policy, the MUS1 policy, has delivered more houses than were estimated originally. So in terms of the overall provision, that is that like I say, that looks like a reasonable scheme to me. Obviously, we've had a mover and a seconder to refuse it. We'll obviously adjourn and test those reasons for refusal, and the mover and seconder can provide the full reasons for refusal, Chairman.
And because we have had a mover and a seconder, we will have to adjourn because you have put forward a proposal to refuse. So we need to adjourn and look at those, where there are substantial planning arguments that support that particular position. So I think that's what we should do at this stage. Before we continue with the proposition that's been made, just looking at that, I just wanted to bring in Mark with a few comments. Okay.
Thank you, Chairman. So, for those particularly at the back who aren't familiar with our protocols, where there is a recommendation or a mover and a seconder to make a decision contrary to the recommendation, our protocols allow for an adjournment to discuss the merits of the reasons put forward. So that's why we've adjourned briefly to discuss the issues. The main issue was that, which was mentioned earlier, and that is the fact that in terms of the local plan, there is, in in terms of calculating densities, there is a reference in the reason justification, paragraph 9.25 of the plan, which looks at what areas need to be taken into account in calculating density. And that does make specific reference to the net residential densities exclude requirements for open space and other elements such as countryside features, retaining ecological features, etc. So we've had further debate with the mover and seconder around that area. Obviously, these policies are only minimum densities, so there are opportunities for further or higher levels of density to be delivered, notwithstanding the provisions in the policy. So I'll hand that back to the chairman just to having explained that position.
Go back to Councillor Collins. Consideration what you said before.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, after discussion with the seconder, we've agreed to withdraw the motion to refuse and propose that we defer decision on this item for officers to go back to the applicants to look at possibilities of increasing the numbers of housing on the site and coming back to this committee.
Yes, Chair. Yeah.
So we need a. All those against? And abstentions? The deferral is lost. So we had a proposer and a seconder before.
Can we confirm that we did?
I think we had a proposer and then somebody indicated support, but I wasn't sure whether that was okay. Can we go now, please, to the vote? And proposed by Councillor Evans and seconded by Councillor Dixon.
And that's the original.
That's the original recommendation.
Which was to delegate to head of planning.
Delegate to the head of planning. Okay. All those in favour, please indicate. All those against? Any abstentions? Thank you.
Obviously, we've still got work to do before we can actually release a decision notice on this application anyway.
Can we now move to item 2, which is page 59 on your report?
Yeah.
Councillor Taylor.
Chair, I hope I'm not too out of order, but I have a cousin who lives at Porridge House as a resident, and that is nearly opposite this property. Do I need to declare an interest?
I shall refer that to somebody who could clarify that particular position.
If it's a neighbouring property, I'd probably declare it, yes.
So,
I would declare it.
yes, is that yes? Yes. So do I need to leave
So
the room?
is that personal interest?
You've got relatives in the was it directly opposite, did you say?
I have a cousin who is a resident in Porridge House, and that is almost opposite the property concerned.
No, if it's a cousin in the resident, you'll be fine.
Thank you for that.
You're content now, Councillor Taylor, yes?
Yes, I'm reassured. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Yeah, we just need to locate the officer that's responsible for the next item, so.
You ready? Yeah. Sorry, I was just checking out whether I was going to win any more gold medals in the time it took me to deal with the item. The next application is number 12 St Thomas's Road, St Anne's, which is indicated by the red circle here. So, let me get the pointer on. It is actually property. We had an application out 12 months ago, so you may well be familiar with it, but we're at obviously the pier, the town hall here, so it's in the St Anne's urban area. Excuse me, it's a semi-detached 3-bedroom property. Surrounding properties, similar scale. There are a variety of designs around there, but they're all similar sort of scale. The council granted planning permission for the property to be converted from a dwelling into an 8-bedroom HMO just over 12 months ago. This application is to change the use to a 9-bedroom HMO, which is done by reducing some of the ground floor communal accommodation from that earlier permission to get the extra bedroom in. The application has been it's been with us quite a while. It's been with us since January. There's been a few iterations of it. At one point, it was going to be submitted as 3 flats and a 6-bed HMO, but there were some queries with the scale of the accommodation that provided. So that's why we've come back to the current scheme. The Town Council have made some observations on the scheme, one of which was about the information not being updated, which is correct, partly because of this juggling around. But they've not raised any objection. But we're here at committee because the 2023 scheme was at committee, and it's effectively a reiteration of that. So, having given you that long-winded introduction to the scheme, that's the property. So it's the right-hand half of that pair of semis. You can see other properties in the area of a similar sort of scale and mixed designs. As existing, it's a big 8-bedroom house. We then approved that to be an 8-bedroom HMO. So that didn't really alter the internal layout particularly. And there's no extensions to the building. It was just a change of use and a few changes in terms of room positionings. So the current proposal is a 9-bedroomed HMO. So I've put big red numbers on to show where each of the bedrooms will be. What we've got with them is an area of communal space on the ground floor, a communal kitchen and sort of potentially work from home type space in the rear outrigger at ground floor, and then there's some storage in the basement as well, and some storage in the rear yard area. So these are the pictures that I presented last year. So see the scale of the property and the views from the rear. Some of the views of the rear yard area that was available. So essentially what we're looking at here is, previously it was an 8-bed HMO that was approved. They're now proposing a 9-bed HMO, which they're doing by the alteration for this element to the rear. So what was the communal lounge and then a separate kitchen is now changed to provide a communal kitchen and then this 9th bedroom in the property. So on the face of it, that seems like it's making the use more intensive, but actually it isn't, because as a HMO, it needs to be licensed by the council as a housing authority. When the discussions with the housing authority took place following the 8-bed approval last year, it came to light that there was probably going to be licensable for maybe 11 people, because one of the key licensing considerations relates to the amount of communal space that's available for the occupiers. So whilst the bedrooms are all big enough to get a double bed in, because the communal area in this communal lounge was of the space it was, it would be licensable under the legislation for 11 people likely. By putting a 9th bedroom in, you're making that communal area smaller. And what that does, it means it's only going to be licensable for single occupancy in each of the rooms. So you're actually reducing the overall occupation of the property because you're going to get 9 single bedrooms, whereas you would have had 8, of which some 3 would have been potentially available for dual occupancy. Again, there's no physical extensions to the property. There's windows that all face, each room has a window, each room's of a suitable size. Each room has a window that faces away from its neighbours, so it faces to the front or the rear, so there's no side-facing privacy issues. These are the elevation drawings. There's no changes there other than this cycle store element to the rear that's being formed, which was part of the earlier scheme as well. So that's what we are. Just running through the considerations quickly. It's in the policy. It's in the settlement area where intensive use of or efficient use of land is promoted. It's in an area where there already is a mixed range of dwellings. There's properties that are houses, properties that are flats. There's a care home over the road. There are other HMOs. So with that setting, there isn't a particular character to the area change that's involved. It's in an area that's well related to services. It's got there's bus routes at the bottom of the road. There's a good easy walk into the town centre, that kind of arrangement. There's no parking being provided, and I think that's something that we discussed last time to some degree. The Highway Authority are happy that there's no parking. They wanted the cycle store, but they were satisfied that there's no parking is an acceptable arrangement in that particular location because of its accessibility. From a planning perspective, I think it's helpful because it also means that the logical place to provide parking would have been on the front garden. So we would end up with going back to the first picture, you'd end up with this wall being removed and a driveway being formed and maybe 3, maybe 4 spaces being provided on there, which obviously wouldn't meet the needs of everybody in the property if it's going to be a 9 or 8 bed HMO, but it would be harmful to the street scene. It would take away roadside parking as well, but it would you further changes on there would diminish the quality of what is not an unattractive property in a pleasant street. So we feel that the highway arrangements are satisfied. I've discussed the intensity element, the occupation. The applicant's business model is to provide accommodation in single occupancy units for professional people is what he says, and it's as a consequence of discussions between him and the housing team that the scheme's evolved to what we're talking about today. There's no change to the neighbour amenity. As I said, there's no overlooking windows. There's no change to the external appearance. There's no physical extensions or alterations other than the cycle store up to the rear. So the officer recommendation is one for approval.
Thank you, Andrew. Councillor Griffiths.
Thank you, Chair. I sat on the last year and supported this. I'm happy to propose it, please.
So we have a proposer. Councillor Collins is seconding. Are there any other comments or contributions, questions, etc.? Or are we happy to go to the vote? All those in favour, please indicate. All those against? Any abstentions? 2 abstentions. Thank you, it's carried. Page 87 of the report, there's an index of appeal decisions there, and there are 3 decisions. That means when decisions have been taken by the council and it hasn't been to the liking of the applicant, etc., then they can go to appeal to the planning inspectorate. And we always put in a report at the end of an applications report regarding any decisions that have been made. You can see there are 3 decisions there, and all the appeals against the decision have been dismissed. You can see the details of the particular items for yourself. So 3 dismissals.
We actually had another decision yesterday which was dismissed as well on a householder one. So
we have 4. So, okay, thank you. Was there anything else that you wanted to say before we finished today?
We're okay to finish, but if we can just as an informal.
Okay, all right. So members just don't quite go, although we're formally closing the meeting now. Thank you for your attendance and your time spending on those particular judgments this morning. Thank you to officers. I was going to thank members of the public, but they've all gone, clearly. So we thank them for their time with us as well. And informally now, we're just going to ask Mark just to say a few words.
Yeah, I've already alluded to this earlier, but members will probably have noticed and heard in the media that yesterday, yesterday the government, oh dear.
No, that doesn't look good either.
No. Don't tell IT about their laptop. It's a good job we stop filming.
I think I'll sit a bit further.
Yeah. Right. Anyway, that's better. Yesterday, in some ways, you've seen that the government published a revised national planning policy framework. So there was a lot of coverage in the press about it, on radio, media, on TV, etc. So I thought it was worthwhile, bearing in mind that we've had this 24 hours to have a quick look at, just to sort of run through some of the key issues. So there was 2 things. One was there was a National Planning Policy Framework update for consultation, which was going out for 8 weeks of consultation. So we'll obviously have to formulate a response on that. There are 106 separate questions asked about what people think about the framework. So there's quite a lot of questions on it. Alongside that, there was a letter from the Deputy Prime Minister, who's got responsibility for planning and under her portfolio, which also addresses the government's sort of general thrust in terms of developing our development to aid the national economy. So just some headlines, because most of the media discussion has been about the housing side of things, and there's more than that. In no particular order, because things do jump around a little bit, but first of all, there's an anticipation to introduce a strategic development strategy, which would cover either the county or a larger than county format. So I suppose that is a return to the previous strategic, regional spatial strategies that we had. Perhaps not quite to the level of the Northwest. Details of which are to be come forward in the future, but that will be eventually where our housing number comes from. There is an interim arrangement, but we'll come back to that in a moment. In terms of affordable housing, the framework is a bit less prescriptive. So previously, I had things like you have to provide 10% as starter homes, and things like that have gone. What they are saying is that that will be down to local assessment of needs in terms of that. The headline figure for housing has been released under sort of the new standard methodology. So the current plan, we had to plan for a housing figure, and that came out, the base figure anyway, came out at 257 dwellings per annum. The plan, because of past under supply, moves that figure around. But in terms of that methodology, that was based on projecting previous completions forward. The new standard methodology is based on a percentage uplift of the amount of the number of homes in an area. So basically a 30% uplift in terms of dwellings, I think, is the way they've done that. So that does have a knock-on effect for Files number. Files previous requirement was 257, or current is 257. The new requirement would be 457, so 200 houses more. In terms of Blackpool, the figure will go from 147 to 632, so significantly more than ours, and Wyre's 280 to 637. So they've got far more increase than we have. Well, that's the challenge that the government are giving you. So in terms of the neighbouring authorities, I suppose you might think, well, the extra rise from Files, because at the end of the day, our plan is planning for more than 457 per annum because of the backlog. But the question is, do you have to take that into account, etc.? I need to delve deeper into what that figure represents. But I suppose the biggest issue is that there is still a duty to cooperate expected, and that is that when Blackpool and Wyre asked that same question, where are all these houses going? One of the issues coming out of that will be asking neighbouring authorities to assist in delivering houses. So the fact that ours has gone up less than Blackpool and Wyre isn't a bullet that's been dodged. It's the fact that we will have to, if Blackpool and Wyre cannot find accommodation for those, they'll no doubt be asking us. Wyre asked us last time on a previous plan of theirs, so that would all be resolved through the duty to cooperate. So we'll move back to that. Another answer to the question about where those houses might go is that Greenbelt is being reviewed, or proposed to be reviewed, and this concept of grey belt, which there is a definition in the draft that comes forward, and basically that is previous developed land that's falling within the green belt. So
ugly.
Indeed, yes, yeah, I think that phrase has been used. Ugly's come in, beautiful's gone out. So it could be that. That's the type of place I would have in mind in terms of around here. There's not, but like I say, that in terms of our green belt, there's not. There will be sites that have been previously developed, but there aren't vast areas of former airfield or something like that that you might get in, former military bases in certain parts of the country that might be in the green belt. If you are getting development in the green belt, they're talking about those having 50% affordable housing on them and making provision for GP surgeries, school, transport provision, etc. But that said, having set down those provisions, as per the debate we had earlier, there is also a provision about assessing the viability of greenbelt release sites. So that's still an issue. On other areas, the nationally significant infrastructure projects, there's proposals to potentially expand the criteria for them to include some key economic development or economic growth developments, such as gigafactories or data centres, that type of thing. So moving away from really just being the infrastructure to some of the development that underpins the national economy. Discussion about allowing councils to set their own planning fees. with a definite proposal to increase the fees for householder and other applications. If you recall, application fees went up last year. Major applications, etc., went up by 35%. Householders went up by 25%. But there's a proposal to increase those fees. Those do actually, they're sort of the amount it costs the council in general to process those applications is significantly below the fee that we get for them. The other ones, the majors, are closer to the fee. And in terms of assessing that, the government are also looking at how could other fees be. So the council, obviously, from its planning service, it prepares a plan to judge the applications against. It carries out enforcement activities, which also have to be paid for. Neither of those have a direct fee, but there is a examination about whether fees should be increased considerably to incorporate paying for the plan preparation and enforcement. If you did that, the suggestion is that the fees would go up by about 157%. So it will be a considerable increase in fees. But it might well be that those are funded by other means. There's changes to, going back to affordable housing, there's changes there to how you can use funds that are in terms of right to buy receipts and being able to combine those with Section 106 funds to deliver affordable housing schemes off-site. So that is obviously to address the supply of affordable housing, although it'd be more of a housing issue than a planning issue to some extent. The 10% affordable home ownership is a requirement of the affordable housing mix provided at the moment, and that's removed to allow a assessment based purely on locally assessed need. So if you need affordable home ownership, then that is down to the local area rather than being sort of directed from the top. Much more emphasis on mixed tenure sites to try and get a mixture of tenures from affordable rent, affordable home ownership, market properties, etc. Removal of the phrase beautiful development. Basically, there are a number of other criteria in there that seek well-designed development, but the idea of beauty and the debate that's been on that previously about it being in the eye of the beholder. How do you quantify what's beautiful? So changes to address that, and to assist with that, emphasis on the National Design Code. Some changes to transport in terms of sort of trying not to be overly fascinated in terms of car journeys created by developments and looking at being more proactive in promoting sustainable transport than currently occurs. Expanding the education. At the moment, when we talk about education contributions, we talk about primary and secondary contributions, but that's expanded to include post-16 and preschool ages. So that's a much wider remit than currently is there. Promotion of low carbon, that's another thing that's in there quite fundamentally, and so there's already been a written ministerial statement to say that the previous sort of moratorium on onshore wind farms has been lifted, so that's been re-emphasised and will be incorporated, proposed to be incorporated into the NSIP, the nationally significant infrastructure procedures. So that's sort of a quick canter through. There are various issues about how to deliver these houses through a new series of new towns across the country. That may or may not be something, I don't doubt it's something that would be required in file, but obviously something that they would have to look at. Consultation is there for 8 weeks, I say in responding to those. So what I would normally do is, that's normally delegated to officers, so what we'll do is have a look at that, come up with some thoughts, and then share those with members ahead of submitting them in 8 weeks' time. In terms of where it means in our local plan, the figure going up, there are some transitional arrangements set out, And those are suggesting that if the new housing figure is more than 200 dwellings per annum away from your current one, that you need to do an immediate review of your local plan. Our local plan provides for more than that, so subject to the maths, etc., and assessing what it actually means, we've got more. We actually plan for more than the figure, the minimum figure that was set out, that the 247 or 257. But notwithstanding that, 257 and 457 is exactly 200. So it says that if it's more than 200, you have to do an immediate review. So 200 I take as being not more than 200. And therefore, that, as it stands, that requirement to do an immediate review is not necessary. However, there is a requirement to review plans every 5 years that we know, and that's what we're working forward to get to now. So if, obviously based on this is a consultation version, but if this goes forwards, those elements that do go forward, or however they are amended, would have to be taken into account in a revised plan, which we would obviously take through the executive committee and the local plan steering group would inform that. So that's really just some headline figures of what's headlines sort of phrases from it. The implications really not had a chance yet to look at how those would affect the plan, how those would affect decisions going forward. But they certainly we will have to look at potentially releasing additional land. We'll have to release additional land anyway for the next iteration of the plan, but the areas that we're looking at might well be more. There is also an emphasis on economic development as well, in providing the sites for commercial development as well, and balancing those up.
Mark, do you think you could just give us those figures again?
So the new figures. So files, we're currently 257. Like I say, that's the minimum requirement. That plan, because it adjusts those up from that. But the new requirement will be 457. So Blackpool is 147 currently, 632 proposed, and Wyre is 280 and 637 proposed.
How have these been calculated?
It seems to be an uplift on how many houses have you got and multiplying it by 30%. I think is it 30%? No.
15 dwelling plots times 0.8% per annum, plus then there's an uplift for affordability in the same way that there was an uplift for affordability before, but the uplift is much larger now than it is.
What from this per dwelling, an actual physical house or so you think about the amount
It's a
of
whole,
houses like
yeah.
ridiculous number.
Yeah, it'll be the number of homes. Yeah.
You want these built on Greenbelt by developers who are going to build half of them pretty much for free, and increase the amount of contributions to schools, doctors, etc. I mean, developers are going to shut down, never mind school more.
They want 1.1.5 million
houses
by 2029.
It's going to go down, Richard, the amount of houses.
So the proposal is to be more concentrated on previous developed land. Some boroughs will have plenty of that, others will not. And because that general approach has been around, I suppose the low-hanging fruit in terms of those sites that are easier, the previous developed land that's easy to bring forward, will already have been brought forward on in the majority of sites. Yeah, so it will be interesting in terms of that. So the proposal is a bit like the previous standard methodology. That's the number you have to provide, and then it's down to the individual councils to provide. So it'll be dictated how many will be down to the individual councils.
In our local plan at the moment, have we got a defined greenbelt areas?
Yes.
We can see them, can't we?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And how are they going to be transferred to grey?
So
within there, who's going to determine what's grey?
It depends what you've got in your green belt.
So there is a definition in the there's a definition of grey belt. So I'm on the wrong document there. Let me just find it.
So just out of interest, that 9 flat HMO, would that be classed as 9 dwellings? Or is that one?
I would say it'd be 9, but
Can you get 10?
so in terms of the definition of grey belt, that's in the appendix. It's a long way down on the document. Grey belt. For the purposes of plan making and decision making, grey belt is defined as land in the green belt, comprising previously developed land and any other parcels and or areas of greenbelt land that make a limited contribution to the 5 greenbelt purposes as defined in the framework. But excluding those areas or assets of particular importance listed in footnote 7, which I think is the ones about the they're the ones about the important areas. So basically, it's previously developed land in the greenbelt. Or areas that can be argued that don't lead to separation of the of settlements, etc.
So, Mark, it's worth mentioning though that you only have to start doing reviews of your green belts, and so you only get into that asset if you're unable to provide your needs from other sites, so sites not in the green belt. So in our case, most probably we wouldn't need to go down that route at all.
Yeah.
Is that the voice of optimism, Eddie? Are you giving us some hope?
I suppose the previous guidance on greenbelt was you shouldn't be releasing it. So greenbelt lasts longer than you plan. So when you come to amend your plan, unless there's a dire need, you don't release it. There's a requirement to do a strategic review of the greenbelt. I suppose the emphasis now is sort of saying that that's not quite so sacrosanct as it previously was. But like I say, these are consultation proposals. Some of the implications of this will come out, but clearly this was something that the current government campaigned on and has mentioned it for a long time ahead of coming into government, and therefore one imagines that they are committed to doing that. That said, previous governments have always said that we're going to review Greenbelt, and it never really has been. So
we don't have as much Greenbelt as, we were discussing this earlier on, and in the south of England, this is going to be quite significant, isn't it?
Yeah, if you look about a map of the country, our borough has got very limited. Most of the borough is countryside, not Greenbelt.
Yeah. Martin? Very astute that you noticed that.
Rather than the belt.
It's a very good point, actually.
Yeah.
Probably keep an open mind.
So yeah, so like I say, so what it will do is I think the main thing is that there's no need to sort of immediately scrabble to amend the current policies. The policies therefore will remain valid because we're within the tolerances that have been set, that 200 dwellings, presumably. What we don't want is for it to be increased to 201, and then which case we have
to say. Were they aware of the significance of that difference of 200 then?
To be honest,
it makes you wonder, doesn't it?
I've not looked at other authorities to see how many come on the 200, but it might. I suspect they didn't look at it and say, "Oh, Files is 200, so that's where we'll set the figure." I think there might be other authorities that have got bigger billing than us.
And the consultation is just a chief planning officer's consultation. It's not a public one.
Yeah, no, anyone can. Yeah. Feel free to go on their website and.
Yeah, do they actually really want to shoot up to know what I have to say?
I don't know if you'll get to the 106th question when you start looking at them.
Yeah, first off, I want to read the dictionary so you can speak correctly.
Right, it's been a long morning, hasn't it? Thank you for your patience and perseverance. Thank you very much. And enjoy the rest of the summer. We'll see you back in September, I think.
The summer finishes at 5, by the way.
Enjoy your August off while the planning officers are grappling with the rules and things.
Got there in the end. You notice what I've done? Having sort of approved consideration that it should be put as I didn't. When it came to the figure.
But more important, they didn't vote against it, they abstained. Which was interesting.
Exactly. Yeah.
Sharon, I think we're in early September.
Oh, good. We,
Yes, of course you are, yeah.
that's the right thing to do. Because
What are they doing that in Stockport, Preston?
I think having spoken,
No, no.
you should at least do them.
Yes, I'd read something like that somewhat.
Then,
Yeah, my
you know,
my stepson had it because he has an airport transfer business, and he got a contract taking a blind lady who lives in Blackburn to Fleetwood every day, because she was a magistrate. No, she was more than a magistrate. She must have been a judge. Anyway, so that was a really good thing for him. He used to take her there in the morning, pick her up and bring her back, do his airport runs in between time, and that was fine. And that was something to do with accommodation at Blackburn. So they were she was temporarily doing the care for at Fleetwood. But now that's finished, so she's back to Blackburn. So he's still got the contract, but he only has to take her around the corner. No, not quite.
Right.
Okay, thanks for your time today again.
Yeah. Right. I want to have a word with Martin.
Bill, cool. He's a former neighbour of mine.
Oh.
I maybe never said that.
You realise? Yeah.
Don't say anything.
But I mean, those.
Sorry.